The rusted iron cross caught the last light of day, its shadow stretching across Roy Callahan's wooden table like an accusation. He'd placed it there 3 days ago and hadn't slept a full night since. Roy's weathered hands trembled slightly as he reached for his whiskey glass. The amber liquid inside, his third tonight, hadn't dulled the unease that had settled in his chest since that day in the woods. 40 years of secrets lay exposed in his cabin, arranged in a neat row before him. The cross, the box, the diary. "I should have left it buried," he whispered to the empty room. Outside, the October wind whipped through the pines surrounding his isolated cabin, the same wind that had guided him off his usual hunting path last week. The same wind that had cleared just enough leaves to reveal that glint of metal in the forest floor. Roy Callahan wasn't a superstitious man. 30 years as a park ranger and another decade as a hunting guide had taught him that most mysteries in these woods had rational explanations. But what he'd found near the ruins of St. Agnes couldn't be explained away by logic or reason. He picked up the small leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age. Sister Helena's final words stared back at him. "In the deepening darkness, we sense a force that watches, that waits. Our sanctuary, once safe, now trembles under the weight of secrets better left unspoken." The phone sat heavy in his hand as he considered his options once more. Call the sheriff and resurrect a 40-year-old tragedy, or rebury everything where he found it and pretend he never disturbed the past. Before we uncover this 40-year-old mystery that's haunted upstate New York for generations, take a second to comment where you're watching from. Are you tucked safely in bed, or somewhere the shadows feel a little too close? Click the subscribe button now to join our community of crime enthusiasts at Last Seen Stories, where some mysteries refuse to stay buried. What Roy Callahan discovered in those woods would reopen wounds the town of Willow Creek had spent decades trying to forget. And by the time the truth emerged, 4 more lives would hang in the balance. Roy Callahan had lived in Willow Creek his entire life, minus the 2 years he'd spent in Vietnam. At 63, his body carried the memory of both, shrapnel scars from Saigon and the slower injuries of 3 decades tracking game through these hills. The locals respected Roy, though few could claim to know him well. He kept to himself, led hunting parties for tourists during season, and vanished into his cabin when winter came. His father had hunted these woods before him, teaching Roy to read the forest like others read books. "Saw old Callahan heading out yesterday," Tom Reed told his wife over breakfast at the Willow Creek Diner. "Means winter's coming soon. Man's like a damn almanac." Roy had indeed headed out at dawn the previous morning, but not for the reasons the town assumed. October 16th, the anniversary of his return from Vietnam, always drove him deeper into the wilderness. The forest didn't ask questions about his nightmares. The day had started crisp and clear, perfect for tracking. But by noon, an unexpected fog had rolled in, seeping through the trees like ghostly fingers. The temperature dropped, unusual for mid-autumn, sending a familiar ache through the metal still lodged in his left knee. "Damn weather," Roy muttered, checking his compass. He'd been tracking a 10-point buck since sunrise, but the mist had erased the trail. A gust of wind cut through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of crumbling stone. Roy paused, rifle lowered, listening. Most hunters avoided the northeastern hills. The ruins of St. Agnes Monastery lay there, and superstition ran deep in Willow Creek. Roy had never put stock in the ghost stories. He'd seen real monsters in Vietnam, and they'd worn human faces. Yet something about the suddenness of the fog and the unseasonal cold made the hair on his neck stand up. The wind shifted again, stronger this time, nearly pushing him sideways. His knee throbbed with the dropping pressure. Storm coming, his instincts warned. Need shelter. The monastery ruins were less than a mile away. the only solid structure in this part of the forest. Roy hesitated, then turned northeast. Ghost stories be damned. He wasn't spending a night exposed to whatever weather was rolling in. The monastery emerged from the mist like a decaying titan. Once proud walls now crumbled inward, stone by stone returning to the earth. Decades of neglect had transformed gardens into wilderness and corridors into hollow shells. Nature was reclaiming what man had abandoned. Roy ducked under a fallen archway, seeking shelter in what had once been the chapel. The roof had partially collapsed, but enough remained to block the thickening mist. He shrugged off his pack and settled against a wall, prepared to wait out the weather. A sudden ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, slicing through a high window. The beam traveled slowly across the debris-strewn floor as the sun shifted position. Something flashed, a brief metallic glint amongst the leaves and dirt. Roy might have missed it if not for his hunter's eyes, trained to spot the slightest movement in dense underbrush. Probably nothing, he told himself, an old nail, a forgotten coin. But curiosity pulled him forward. He knelt, brushing away dead leaves with gloved hands. The metal object wasn't a nail or coin, it was the upper portion of a cross, an iron cross, its surface corrupted by decades of exposure. "Huh," Roy murmured, lifting it carefully. The cross was heavy, its bottom half buried deeper in the accumulated debris. He dug further, using his hunting knife to loosen the compacted soil. The cross was larger than he'd expected, almost 15 inches tall when fully excavated. But it wasn't alone in its earthen grave. As Roy widened his search area, his fingers brushed against something solid and square. The box wasn't large, perhaps the size of a thick hardcover book. Blue cloth, faded almost to gray, wrapped the container, preserved by the dry soil beneath the chapel's partial roof. Roy hesitated before unwrapping it, a strange reluctance suddenly gripping him. "Don't be ridiculous," he chided himself, carefully peeling back the cloth. The box itself was simple wood, its brass hinges green with age. Roy's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside lay objects arranged with careful precision, a rosary with dark stains on its wooden beads, a torn page covered in faded script, a tarnished silver locket, and beneath them all, a small, leather-bound book. The diary. Roy's breath caught as he opened the locket. 6 faces stared back at him, a priest and 5 nuns, their expressions solemn yet somehow serene. He recognized them immediately from the newspaper clippings, from the stories told in hushed voices at the Willow Creek Diner. The missing clergy of St. Agnes. The wind howled outside, rattling what remained of the chapel windows. Roy quickly rewrapped the box and tucked it into his pack, along with the cross. Some instinct warned against leaving these items where they'd rested for 40 years. 2 hours later, Roy sat across from Sheriff Nora Landry in her office, the contents of the box arranged between them. "Jesus Christ," Landry whispered, lifting the rosary. "You know what you found, don't you?" Roy nodded. "The St. Agnes case. My father used to talk about it." "Talk about it?" Landry's laugh was hollow. "This town was torn apart by it. I was just a kid when it happened, but I remember the searches, the theories, the fear." She studied Roy's face. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Under the chapel floor. Looked like it had been deliberately buried." Landry picked up the diary, her fingers hovering over the cover without opening it. "This could change everything we thought we knew about that night." November 1974, St. Agnes Monastery. Morning light filtered through stained glass, casting colored patterns across the chapel's stone floor. Father Lucien Moreau knelt at the altar, head bowed in prayer, his thin frame casting a long shadow up the center aisle. At 62, the French-born priest still maintained the rigid discipline that had defined his 3 decades of service. His silver hair was precisely cut, his hands, rough from garden work, clasped firmly together. When he spoke, his accent still carried traces of his Normandy childhood, though he'd left France in 1945, after the war had taken everything but his faith. "Bless this day and those who dwell in your house," he whispered, crossing himself before rising. Behind him, the chapel door opened quietly. Sister Helena entered, her steps nearly silent on the stone floor. At 47, she served as the monastery's de facto administrator, managing the dwindling finances with careful precision. "Good morning, Father," she said. "The sisters are preparing breakfast." Father Lucien nodded, his smile gentle. "And how did you sleep, sister?" Helena hesitated. "The same as last night." The sounds returned. The priest's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll discuss it after morning prayers." By 1974, the monastery housed only 6 permanent residents. The community that had once numbered 30 had slowly dispersed, some to more active orders, others lost to age or disillusionment. The massive stone complex designed for a thriving religious community now echoed with emptiness. In the kitchen, Sister Miriam, the youngest at 32, prepared breakfast with Sister Rosina. Both women had arrived at St. Agnes, seeking refuge from personal tragedies. Miriam had lost her fiancé in Vietnam. Rosina had fled an abusive marriage. "Did you hear it again last night?" Miriam asked, her voice low. Rosina nodded, continuing to slice bread. "Sister Dolores says it's just the wind in the old stones." "And Sister Beatrice?" "Prayed until dawn." The small community gathered for breakfast at precisely 7 o'clock, as they had every morning for years. Their conversations were subdued, touching on garden plans and necessary repairs to the east wing. None mentioned the sounds that had begun 3 weeks earlier: scraping noises in the walls, footsteps in empty corridors, voices whispering just beyond comprehension. Beyond the monastery walls, America was changing rapidly. The Vietnam War had officially ended, but its wounds remained unhealed. Watergate had shattered public trust in institutions. The counterculture movement had transformed social norms, and traditional religious vocations had declined sharply. In Willow Creek, opinions about the monastery were divided. Some respected the clergy's dedication and service, others viewed them with suspicion. Their isolation, their European origins, their adherence to ancient rituals, all seemed increasingly foreign in modern America. "They keep to themselves too much," Nancy Palmer told her husband over dinner. "It isn't natural." "They're just old-fashioned," Robert Palmer replied. "World's changing faster than they can keep up." Within the monastery, changes were emerging as well. Sister Helena had begun documenting strange occurrences in her diary. Father Lucien spent more time in solitary prayer. Sister Beatrice claimed to have seen a figure watching them from the tree line during evening vespers. And in late October, Sister Dolores found symbols carved into the chapel door, markings none of them recognized, but all instinctively feared. Harold Finch had delivered supplies to St. Agnes Monastery every Tuesday for 17 years. The 53-year-old shopkeeper knew the community's modest needs by heart: flour, sugar, coffee, seasonal vegetables, and the French chocolates Father Lucien quietly requested for the sisters' birthdays. Tuesday, November 12, 1974, began like any other delivery day. Harold loaded his truck before dawn, drove the winding forest road as the sun rose, and arrived at the monastery gates at precisely 8:15 a.m. The iron gates stood open, unusual, but not unprecedented. Harold drove through, parking in the small courtyard as always. He gathered the first box of supplies and headed toward the kitchen entrance. "Sister Helena," he called, pushing the door open. "Sister Miriam?" No response greeted him. The kitchen was empty, but not unused. A pot of coffee sat on the stove, still warm. 6 cups had been poured, but only one showed signs of being drunk. The others remained full, cooling in the morning air. "Hello?" Harold called again, louder this time. His voice echoed through the stone corridors. Moving from kitchen to dining room, Harold discovered a scene that would haunt him for decades to come. The breakfast table was fully set. 6 plates held partially eaten meals. 6 chairs were pushed back at different angles, as if their occupants had risen simultaneously. A half-knitted scarf lay draped across one chair, needles still attached. A leather-bound prayer book sat open beside another plate, its ribbon marker fluttering in the draft from an open window. Father Lucien's reading glasses rested atop an open Bible, a coffee ring staining the ancient page. Sister Rosina's rosary beads had scattered across the floor, the string broken. "Father Lucien?" Harold's voice had risen, tinged with growing concern. "Sisters?" He searched the ground floor methodically. Kitchen, dining room, common areas, chapel. Each space told the same story, occupied one moment, abandoned the next. At 9:30 a.m., Harold Finch drove into Willow Creek at dangerous speed, his truck skidding to a halt outside the sheriff's office. "They're gone," he told Sheriff William Cooper, his hands shaking. "All of them. Just vanished." By noon, the first search party had assembled. By nightfall, state police had arrived. Within 3 days, the disappearance had made national news. Search teams combed the forest with dogs. Helicopters circled overhead. Divers checked the lake 2 miles east of the monastery. Local volunteers searched every outbuilding, cellar, and attic on the property. They found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, no farewell notes. 6 people had simply vanished from a locked monastery in the middle of nowhere. Young Detective Frank Sullivan, newly transferred from Albany, led the investigation with methodical precision. He interviewed everyone in Willow Creek, cataloged every item in the monastery, and compiled detailed profiles of each missing person. They couldn't just disappear, he insisted during nightly briefings. People don't vanish into thin air. But as weeks stretched into months, the case grew cold. Theories circulated through the town. They'd fled to Canada, they'd joined a more radical religious group, they'd witnessed something they shouldn't have, and been silenced. As years passed, the monastery fell into disrepair. The diocese couldn't afford to maintain an empty building, and no new clergy wished to live where 6 of their own had vanished. Nature began its slow reclamation. Ivy climbed stone walls, roof tiles slipped away in winter storms, windows shattered in summer thunderstorms, and the story of St. Agnes became legend. A ghost story told around campfires, a warning to stay away from the northeastern woods. If you're finding this case as haunting as I do, hit that like button to help other mystery fans discover this story. And stay with me, because what happened next would shake the foundations of everything Willow Creek thought it knew about that November morning. Sheriff Nora Landry spread the contents of the box across her desk, carefully photographing each item before placing it in an evidence bag. "The rosary is definitely Sister Rosina's," she said, pointing to the initials carved into the largest bead. "And these stains," she hesitated, "we should have them tested." Roy watched silently as she worked, the weight of his discovery becoming increasingly clear. He'd stumbled upon evidence in a case that had defined his hometown for decades. "What bothers me most is the diary," Landry continued, gently turning pages with a gloved hand. "Sister Helena was documenting something in the weeks before they vanished. Listen to this entry from October 25th. The scratching in the walls continued for a 3rd night. Father Lucien believes it's only mice, but Sister Beatrice insists she saw someone watching from the woods during evening prayers." Roy leaned forward. "Could have been a hiker." In 1974, that area was private property, miles from any trail. Landry turned another page. October 30th. "The symbols appeared on the chapel door this morning. None of us recognized them, though Father spent hours searching through his reference books. Sister Miriam is frightened. We've begun locking our doors at night." The sheriff's phone rang. interrupting her reading. She answered briefly, her expression shifting from interest to concern. "That was the lab," she said after hanging up. "They've done a preliminary examination of the cross you found. There are traces of blood in the corrosion." Roy's stomach tightened. "Human?" "They're testing now," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "Roy, I think we need help with this. This isn't just a historical curiosity anymore. This is potentially evidence in an unsolved disappearance, maybe worse." "What kind of help?" "The detective who originally led the investigation is still alive, Frank Sullivan. He's retired now, living in a care facility in Oak Ridge County." Roy hadn't slept properly since finding the box. Each night the same nightmare returned. He was in the monastery chapel, but the stone walls seemed to breathe around him. Whispers filled the air just below the threshold of understanding, and always at the end, 6 figures stood watching him from the shadows, their faces hidden behind black veils. "I'll drive you there tomorrow," Landry said, noting Roy's exhaustion. "Sullivan might recognize something we're missing." The next morning, they drove the 2 hours to Oak Ridge County in silence, the evidence box secured in Landry's trunk. The Oak Ridge retirement home was a pleasant, modern facility surrounded by maple trees sporting brilliant autumn colors. Sullivan's nurse led them to a small private room where the former detective sat by a window, a chessboard positioned before him. Frank Sullivan had aged, but his eyes remained sharp. At 78, his body had grown frail, his hand slightly trembling with early Parkinson's, but his mind remained clear. "Sheriff Landry," he said, recognizing her uniform before she introduced herself. "What brings Willow Creek's finest to my door?" "St. Agnes, Mr. Sullivan," she answered directly. "New evidence has surfaced." The old detective's expression changed instantly. "After 40 years? What kind of evidence?" Roy stepped forward, introducing himself and explaining his discovery. As he spoke, Sullivan's gaze intensified, his chess game forgotten. "I need to see it," he said when Roy finished. "Now." Landry placed the box on Sullivan's small dining table, opening it carefully. The old detective's hands trembled more visibly as he reached for the silver locket. "I remember this," he whispered. "Sister Helena wore it always. A gift from her mother, she told me during my initial interviews." He opened it with surprising dexterity, revealing the photograph inside, all 6 of them taken just months before they vanished. Roy noticed tears forming in Sullivan's eyes. "This case," Sullivan said softly, "this damn case. It followed me for 40 years, my white whale." He looked up at Landry. "You've tested the stains on the rosary?" "Preliminary results confirm human blood type O negative. We're running DNA now, but after 40 years. Sullivan nodded. "Sister Beatrice was O negative. I remember because she had a medical alert bracelet, hemophilia." He touched the rosary gently. "But this belonged to Sister Rosina." "There's more," Landry said, removing the diary from its evidence bag. "Sister Helena's personal journal. The entries stop abruptly on November 11th, the day before they disappeared." Sullivan took the diary with reverence, his professional demeanor momentarily broken. "She kept notes on everything, organized to a fault." He began turning pages slowly. "I interviewed everyone in that town 3 times, found nothing, not a single credible lead." His expression darkened as he continued reading. "These entries about noises, symbols, watching figures, none of this was reported to me, not by anyone." "Maybe they didn't know," Roy suggested. "Or didn't want to tell," Sullivan countered. "Willow Creek protected its secrets." He turned another page, then suddenly stopped. What the hell? He'd reached an entry from early November. The normally neat handwriting had become jagged, urgent. Phrases were underlined multiple times. November 3rd. Father Lucien finally admitted what we've all suspected. We are not alone here. The visitors come at night now, no longer hiding their presence. They left another symbol, this time carved into Sister Miriam's door. Father recognized it finally, an ancient sign associated with the covenant of true light. He's contacted the diocese for guidance, but I fear help will come too late. They are watching us constantly now. The covenant of true light, Sullivan whispered. My God, it was right under our noses. What is it? Roy asked. A cult, small but dangerous. They were active in this region during the early 70s. We investigated them for several unrelated incidents: vandalism, animal mutilations, harassing local churches, but we never connected them to St. Agnes. Sullivan's hands shook as he turned to the final entry. Helena's last words. November 11th. In the deepening darkness, we sense a force that watches, that waits. Our sanctuary, once safe, now trembles under the weight of secrets better left unspoken. Father believes they will make their move soon. We've hidden what evidence we could gather beneath the chapel floor. If something happens to us, may God guide someone to this truth. Sullivan closed the diary slowly. All these years, I thought they'd left voluntarily, or been taken against their will. But this... He looked up, his eyes clear and determined despite his age. Sheriff Landry, we need to go back to that monastery, and I need to come with you. Mr. Sullivan, with all due respect, your health, to hell with my health. I've waited 40 years for this moment. Those people deserve justice, and I intend to see they get it. He stood shakily. Besides, I know things about the covenant that never made it into any official report. Things that might help us understand what we're looking at. Landry hesitated, then nodded. We leave tomorrow morning. The monastery ruins looked different to Roy this time. What had seemed merely abandoned now felt ominous. Each crumbling wall potentially concealing evidence, each shadow hiding secrets 40 years old. Sullivan struggled up the overgrown path, leaning heavily on a cane but refusing assistance. His face showed determination beneath the strain. The chapel was here, he said, pointing with his cane toward the partially collapsed building where Roy had made his discovery. And the living quarters were through there, in the east wing. Landry had brought 2 deputies and a crime scene technician. They moved methodically through the ruins, photographing and documenting everything before disturbing the site. Show me exactly where you found the box, Sullivan directed Roy. They entered the chapel carefully, mindful of the unstable structure. Roy led them to the spot near the altar where he'd discovered the cross. It was right here, under about 6 inches of debris. Sullivan studied the area, his detective's eyes missing nothing despite his age. This stone is different from the others, he said, pointing to the floor where Roy had dug. Newer, replaced. The crime scene technician knelt, examining the stonework. He's right, this section was reset at some point, different mortar. Help me move it, Sullivan ordered. It took all 4 men to shift the heavy stone slab. Beneath it lay a shallow cavity, and within that space, another box larger than the first. My God, Landry whispered. The technician photographed the cavity before carefully removing the box. Unlike the first, this container was metal, sealed against the elements. Inside they found folders of papers, photographs, and a small tape recorder with several cassettes. Evidence, Sullivan said, his voice thick with emotion. They were building a case against someone. That's why they were targeted. The photographs showed men in dark robes performing rituals in the forest. Some images captured faces clearly. Local men, including several prominent Willow Creek citizens of the era. Victor Bennett, Sullivan identified one face immediately. He was town council president in the 70s. I interviewed him 3 times. He claimed he barely knew the monastery clergy. Other photographs documented strange symbols carved into trees around the monastery grounds, the same markings Sister Helena had described in her diary. Most disturbing were the transcripts, carefully typed accounts of conversations the clergy had overheard or recorded. They detailed plans for rituals, membership lists, and references to cleansing the monastery. They knew they were in danger, Landry said, reviewing the documents. They were gathering evidence against the Covenant. Sullivan nodded grimly. And the Covenant silenced them before they could expose the truth. He held up a final photograph. Victor Bennett standing with the local sheriff of the era, Edward Moore. Now we know why my investigation hit so many roadblocks. Roy studied the faces in the photographs. Is Bennett still alive? Moved to a property outside town about 20 years ago, Landry confirmed. Lives alone since his wife died. Mostly keeps to himself. Sullivan's expression hardened. Then that's where we're going next. Back in Landry's office, they connected the pieces. The Covenant of True Light had infiltrated Willow Creek's leadership by the early 1970s. When the monastery clergy began documenting their activities, they became targets. Sullivan worked tirelessly, despite his fatigue, his decades-old case finally yielding answers. He listened to the cassette tapes, recordings of cult meetings made secretly by Father Lucien. Bennett is mentioned repeatedly as the Guardian, he noted, and listen to this. He played a section where a man's voice, identified by Sullivan as Bennett's, discussed the monastery. The observers persist in their interference. The Guardian Council has determined they must be removed before the solstice ritual. Their presence defiles sacred ground that has been ours since before their stone walls were raised. This case has taken an unexpected turn. Comment below with your theories about what happened to Father Lucien and the sisters, and if you think the Covenant members are still active in Willow Creek today. Victor Bennett's property sat 5 miles outside Willow Creek, a sprawling, wooded estate surrounded by an 8-foot iron fence. At 88, Bennett remained physically imposing, his white hair cropped short, his posture military straight despite his age. He met them at the front door before they'd even knocked. "Sheriff Landry," he acknowledged coldly, "to what do I owe this intrusion?" His eyes widened slightly when he saw Sullivan. "Frank Sullivan, I heard you were wasting away in some nursing home." "Not quite wasting enough, it seems," Sullivan replied. Landry produced a warrant. "We need to search your property, Mr. Bennett. New evidence has emerged in the St. Agnes disappearance case." Bennett's composure slipped momentarily. "That nonsense? After 40 years?" "Murder has no statute of limitations," Sullivan stated flatly. Bennett evaluated them silently, then stepped aside with a thin smile. "By all means, Sheriff, my home is open to you. I have nothing to hide." The house revealed nothing immediately suspicious, an old man's residence, meticulously maintained. But Roy noticed Bennett watching Sullivan constantly, his expression calculating. "You mentioned murder, Detective Sullivan," Bennett said, as they completed the interior search. "Rather presumptuous without bodies, wouldn't you say?" Sullivan met his gaze steadily. "We know about the Covenant, Victor. We have the photographs, the recordings, the membership lists." Something shifted in Bennett's eyes, a flicker of alarm quickly masked. Ancient history, spiritual exploration that got a bit theatrical in the counterculture era. Nothing sinister. "Then you won't mind if we search your grounds as well," Landry interjected. "The warrant covers the entire property." Bennett's smile tightened. "The grounds are extensive. You could spend days searching." "We have time," Sullivan assured him. As they moved toward the rear of the property, Deputy Michaels radioed Landry from the northwest corner of the estate. "Sheriff, you're going to want to see this." They found Michaels standing before a small, immaculately maintained clearing surrounded by 7 ancient oak trees. At its center stood a stone altar, weathered but clearly still in use. "Spiritual exploration, Mr. Bennett?" Sullivan asked coldly. Bennett remained silent, his expression unreadable. The search intensified. Teams methodically covered the property, focusing on areas showing signs of disturbance or unusual maintenance. It was Roy who made the discovery. A patch of ground near the tree line differed subtly from its surroundings, the vegetation slightly younger, the ground minimally depressed despite efforts to mask it. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed what Roy had suspected. Beneath the surface lay a mass grave. The excavation took hours. Forensic teams worked carefully, documenting everything as Bennett watched from the porch, now under guard. 6 bodies, carefully arranged in a circular pattern. Despite 40 years of decomposition, enough remained for preliminary identification. The clerical clothing had partially survived. A silver crucifix still hung around the neck of the central figure. Father Lucien, Sullivan identified him, his voice breaking slightly, and the sisters around him. When confronted with the evidence, Bennett's demeanor changed. The veneer of respectability cracked, revealing glimpses of the zealot beneath. "You understand nothing," he told them, his voice suddenly fervent. "They witnessed our sacred rites, threatened to expose our work to the diocese. The council had no choice." "You murdered 6 people for practicing their faith," Landry countered. Bennett laughed, a hollow, disturbing sound. "We gave them an honorable death. They became the foundation for something greater." Sullivan leaned forward, his age forgotten in this moment of culmination. "How did you do it? Drug them at breakfast?" The cups were still full when Harold found them. Bennett's smile was chilling. "The night before, actually. We entered through the passages beneath the monastery, tunnels that predated their arrival by centuries. The land was ours before it was theirs." His expression turned distant, remembering. "They barely struggled. The incense we burned contained a powerful sedative. By midnight, they were compliant. By dawn, they were part of our greatest ritual." "And you buried them here?" "On your property," Landry pressed. "Sacred ground," Bennett corrected. "Their sacrifice consecrated it. Every ritual since has drawn power from their eternal presence." As Bennett continued his confession, seemingly relieved to finally speak openly about his achievement, Sullivan quietly recorded every word. The case that had haunted him for 40 years was finally closing. Later, as Bennett was led away in handcuffs, he called out to Sullivan, "You're too late, detective. The covenant lives. Our work continues." Sullivan watched the patrol car drive away. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but so does justice." The discovery at Bennett's estate shook Willow Creek to its core. 3 other surviving covenant members were identified through Bennett's confession and the evidence Father Lucien had gathered. Each was arrested, ending decades of secrets. A memorial service was held at the monastery site 2 weeks later. The diocese sent representatives, and many Willow Creek residents attended, some out of respect, others seeking closure for a mystery that had defined their community. Sullivan stood at the back, leaning heavily on his cane. The case had demanded his remaining strength, but satisfaction showed on his weathered face. "I made a promise to them," he told Roy quietly. "The day I realized we'd hit a wall in the investigation, I promised I wouldn't forget them." "You kept your word," Roy replied. 40 years late, but not too late for justice. After the bodies were properly buried in consecrated ground, the diocese announced plans to restore part of the monastery as a memorial. The site would no longer stand as a monument to tragedy, but as a testament to faith preserved through time. For Sullivan, the case's resolution brought peace he'd long sought. The night after Bennett's confession, he slept without nightmares for the first time in decades. Roy still occasionally woke from dreams of the monastery chapel, but the whispering figures no longer appeared in the shadows. Instead, he sometimes glimpsed 6 silhouettes in the light, peaceful. Their long vigil finally ended. Sheriff Landry established a cold case division within her small department. "Some secrets refuse to stay buried," she told reporters, "and some truths refuse to be silenced forever." Sister Helena's diary now rests in the Willow Creek Historical Museum, its final entries testifying to courage in the face of encroaching darkness. Visitors often linger over the glass display, reading her last written words. Yet one mystery remains unsolved. Among the evidence Father Lucian collected was mention of a sacred text, the Covenant's founding document, containing rituals dating back centuries. Despite thorough searches of Bennett's property and those of other Covenant members, this book was never found. Some in Willow Creek whisper that it waits still, hidden somewhere in the forests surrounding the old monastery. Others insist Bennett managed to pass it to an unknown successor before his arrest. Sheriff Landry keeps a file open, monitoring for signs the Covenant might resurface. Sullivan, now returned to his retirement home, still reviews his notes periodically, searching for clues they might have missed. And Roy Callahan still hunts those woods, his eyes now watching for more than game trails. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Some mysteries demand resolution, regardless of time's passage. The disappearance of Father Lucien and the five sisters is solved, but its echoes continue to resonate through Willow Creek, a reminder that evil can hide behind respectable faces and that justice, while sometimes delayed, need not be denied. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, share it with a friend who loves crime stories, and don't forget to subscribe to Last Seen Stories for more chilling, unsolved cases every day. The truth is out there, waiting to be discovered, one forgotten relic at a time.